Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on risk versus independence. We will be starting shortly. I'm just going to wait for everybody to come through, and then we will be getting going. Okay, brilliant. So, good afternoon, everyone. And as I said, welcome to our webinar on risk versus independence, our latest parenting webinar in conjunction with the Positive Parenting Project. My name is Laura Klein, and I'm the Operations and Services Director here at Support Network, which is the personal advice and support charity for members of the IMechE and their family. I'm shortly going to hand over to Anita Clear, who is the Director of the Positive Parenting Project. Anita is an author and coach and will be delivering the content today. We are recording today's webinar, and all delegates will be sent a copy within a week or so. And so if you do have any technical issues, you will be able to watch at a later date. If you do have any issues, please try refreshing your screen. And if that doesn't work, you can put it in the Q&A box and I will see if I can assist. Today's webinar will last approximately 50 minutes, and then we will have time for a Q&A session at the end. I would encourage you to use the Q&A box for any questions you have, because those will be completely private. You are also welcome to use the chat box, but you may then need to choose who you are sending your message to, whether it's all participants or the hosts and panelists. Anita, over to you.
Oh, thanks, Laura. Welcome, everybody. Yes, today we are talking about how we can go about balancing risks with children's need to grow independence and need for freedoms. Now, one of the things I want to do is I want to start with a quotation. So this is a comment that I received on a post in my blog. Which was on this topic around kind of, risk aversion. And it was obviously from a 90-year-old gentleman who said he was sad about how young children these days have lost their freedom. We had no supervision when going to school in all weathers or in our wild time at the weekends. It was wartime, so effort was required to find what we needed for blowpipes, barrel hoops, pram wheels with axle, etc. At nights, the roads were ink black due to the blackout. We made igloos in the snow and ice slides on which we could reach orbital speed. We learned which wild plants were edible, gathered fruit, nut, mushrooms. We had a wonderful, adventurous life, free as birds. Now, I love that quote, partly because it reminds us that parenting is cultural and it's historic. It happens in a place and a moment in time. And our moment in time is obviously different from that. I look back to my childhood in the 70s and 80s and have similar views in some ways, that I was allowed a lot more freedom. On one level, I look at that quotation and the parent inside me is horrified. Oh my goodness, all of those potential harms, the lack of supervision, playing with dangerous objects, eating wild plants, potentially poisonous. How much has parenting changed compared to how we approach things today? But I think it highlights how modern parenting is incredibly risk averse. Children spend more time these days supervised by adults, more time inside their homes, less time in independent free play, certainly outside. And they're not even allowed outside unaccompanied by an adult until a much later age. You think about the age at which you walked to school, for example, or got to school by yourself compared to your children. And I think COVID, especially the restrictions of COVID, brought some of these issues into a quite stark relief, that, we start to understand that there are harms associated with not being allowed to do things, with not being allowed to encounter the world, and that total containment, total protection kind of strategy. And hopefully for you, this session will be, well, an opportunity to think about these issues and think about that risk aversion that is the norm today, and how you might challenge it and how it might be impacting on your children. So as Laura said, so my name is Anita Clear. I have been working with parents now for about 20 years and on all aspects of parenting, children's development and well-being. I'm the author of a couple of books, The Work Parent Switch, that's for parents of children up to about the age of 10, and how to get your teenager out of their bedroom. Very relevant to this particular topic around risk aversion, because sometimes it's the kids who are risk averse too. My academic background is developmental psychology, and we will be providing resources. You don't need to remember everything I'm going to say. It's probably better to use it as a slightly more reflective session. We will send through resources. If for any reason you're watching this on the recording and you don't have access to those, you can use the QR code. You can connect with me, but you could also navigate to my blog, Thinking Parenting, where you'll find lots of resources on this topic, and especially around play for younger ones, and how we talk to older children about tricky topics. So there's lots of resources available for you. What I want to do today is to help you think about why independence, freedom, doing things for themselves is so important for children. And freedom and doing things for yourself means encountering an element of risk. So we want to think really hard, have a hard think about actually what keeps children safe. Because sometimes the things that we assume keep children safe are not actually the most protective factors. We'll think about what do children need to know at different ages in order to keep themselves safe, and how you can go about gradually extending freedoms so that your child can kind of learn to manage new freedom, in an age appropriate and in a bite-sized way so that they do that safely. So how do we implement that balance between safety and independence? I will talk a little bit about online safety, the key principles around that and the kind of risks that you need to think about, where you might be able to get support. I'm not an online safety expert, but I think an awful lot of this is exactly the same as in the real world. It's about having conversations and being able to talk about these things and equip your children with the ability to keep themselves safe. And we'll think at the end about how you manage your fears and worries, because quite often those are the barriers to us, feeling happy to let our children do things. I'm going to start off though by asking you a question. I'd love to know, you came to this session for a reason, and something about the title, about the description made you think, oh, I'm interested in that. So there's a good chance that somewhere in your head you've got some risks or some issues that you're worried about or concerned about, or you're not sure how to navigate those. I'd love it if you'd share those. You can share them just directly with the hosts. I will check back with Laura to see if anything's been shared with her, or you can put them in the chat box if you're happy for everyone to see them. But it's quite helpful for me to know what you're thinking about, because then of course I can make sure I cover it off in the session. It's also useful, I think, to know what other parents are thinking about and what they're worried about. So while you're doing that, I'm going to talk through this slide and then we'll go back and have a look at what you came up with. And this to me, I mean, this is the most important part of the session, in my opinion, is this idea of really understanding why it's so important that children are allowed to grow their independence and that they are allowed freedoms and independence in an age appropriate way. When we are too risk averse and we stop children from doing things, that inevitably leads to a narrower set of experiences for children. And that really matters, because children build their brains, they learn about the world, they develop their skills and knowledge by encountering the world. So if you think about a baby, when they're born, their brains are full of long neurons, almost like little microscopic pieces of string. And by encountering the world in the most simple way to start with, just on a sensory level and touching it and then getting around and running around in it and throwing things and, being a part of the world, they start to tie together those brain cells and they get tied together into neurological pathways which store skills and knowledge. And the more diverse children's experiences, then the more they have the opportunity to adapt, to create, to problem solve, and the more flexible their brains are going to become as a result of that, the wider their experiences that they have to draw upon in order to solve future problems or to create or to navigate the world. And when we keep children safe, when we look at how, the ways that we do that, quite often by safe, what we mean is we keep them indoors and we keep them sedentary, not particularly moving around. And I've spoken to lots of parents of teenagers, myself included, who will talk about gaming, for example, and saying, well, at least I know where he is. He's in his bedroom. At least I know where he is. He's not out on the streets at risk or doing things. Of course, as I'll talk about, that doesn't mean to say that there's no risks happening, because the online world brings risks into the home. But actually, it's not a very healthy activity to spend lots and lots of time sitting down and gaming. It doesn't lead to that diverse set of experiences. So children need to experience risk in order to develop competence and confidence, that we can't take away all of their challenges and then expect them to be able to navigate challenges competently and confidently. It's by encountering risks that children learn to manage risks. They don't do things by learning them in theory. So much of children's learning is in practice. And when we look at the kind of the research on what's called the roaming areas of children, you look back a century ago, your average child was allowed to be 6 miles away from home, and that was considered normal. And this was without adult supervision, probably not on their own, probably with other children and with mixed age group children quite often. Whereas now it's down to about 300 meters that we don't allow children out on the streets. Now, of course, there are more risks now in terms of particularly traffic, cars, environment. The built environment is far less conducive to keeping children safe. But that's a very big difference. And when children are out and about in that genuinely free and unstructured outdoor play, they're learning so much. And that's a very rare experience for children these days. Play tends to be confined to specialist places. We take children to parks, playgrounds, we take them to petting zoos, we take them to soft play, we take them to places where the risks have been eliminated. And if they do encounter risk in those places, we get very cross about that because we want it to be a safe space. Whereas, and playgrounds now are incredibly safe compared to how they were in the past. Some of the rickety equipment that I used, which was downright dangerous. But in that experience of encountering risk, children learn. And one of the most important things that they learn is that they are capable and competent, and that builds their self-esteem. We build self-esteem by having little moments to shine, where we feel a moment of triumph, where perhaps we've tackled something difficult, a bit of a challenge, but we've managed it. Maybe not even first time, but we've got better at it. And often those moments to shine involve taking a bit of a risk. For example, a risk in play, where children are actually kind of safe, but they're right at the edge of their competence. Think of that moment where a toddler or a preschooler, a little one, is trying to climb a piece of equipment or climb the ladder on a slide by themselves. And you're there as their parent, you're kind of hovering, to help in case they slip, but you're letting them do it for themselves. Now, that is learning to manage the risk of falling. And that's getting imprinted into their brains. And whenever possible, it's such a good idea to let children try. By stepping back and letting them try, we're basically signaling to this, you can do this. Yeah, you've got this. And even if they don't succeed, it's like, okay, you did really well. I bet you'll do even better next time. You nearly did it. You tried really hard. So the act of encountering challenge, and challenge often involves an element of risk, helps to build self-esteem. And that, helps children, get that sense of mastery and competence and bravery, that they can take those small brave steps. Laura, I'm not sure if we had any comments that came to you on things that people are worried about in terms of risks.
Yes, we had a couple put in. So someone in attendance is worried about their children being hurt when they're not there to help.
Okay, yep, that's a brilliant one. I'm just
Um,
making a note of that. Hmm.
and so then also we've got someone else is worried that their child might be encouraged to do more risky things when they're out with friends than they would normally trust them, but seem to be
Yeah,
concerned um, that as a group that could
yeah.
lead
And
to.
that peer influence and peer pressure that they're more likely, and actually with teenagers they do, the evidence is quite clear that they take more risks when they're with friends, when they're with their peers, than they perhaps would on their own, and that's part of their kind of brain development that's going on. Brilliant, thank you. So what I will try and do as we go through, I will make sure I incorporate those. And if I haven't, then by the time we get to the questions, I will check back and have a think specifically to answer those. Thank you to everybody who put something in there. So what I want to start with then, therefore, is to think about what is it that actually keeps children safe. So what I should have said at the beginning when I introduced myself is, part of one of the roles that I have had in my life in kind of working in family was a child protection role, working in safeguarding. And as part of that, we had the slightly difficult, unpleasant job of reviewing where things had gone wrong for children, perhaps where there'd been a serious accident or even death, um, and working out what were the factors that perhaps could have been done differently and understanding the evidence around what keeps children safe. Now, in terms of what we know from evidence on what keeps children safe, well, on the macro level, the big wider picture, society, community keeps children safe. So, the criminal justice system, the laws that we have, the police system that we have, the social fabric of people looking out for each other, that sense of community on that big level, that helps keep children safe if everybody has a sense of responsibility that children are vulnerable and therefore need to be kept safe. Drilling down a little bit, supervision keeps children safe. As long as it's by safe adults, and not all adults are safe adults, and as long as it's age appropriate. So, the level of supervision will change as children get older. If you've got a toddler and they're in an unfamiliar space or they're outdoors, or even if they're in a part of your home that isn't particularly toddler friendly, they need constant watching, constant supervision. That's kind of like 100% blanket almost. If they're in a slightly safer space, that you've toddler proofed, then it's going to be slightly less. And as they get older, children need less and less direct interventory supervision, but they still need supervision by safe adults. But the thing that I think, and as a society, we tend to think about supervision when we think about safety. The bit that we often miss, though, is knowledge. The fact is, the best way to keep children safe is to make sure they have the skills and knowledge to keep themselves safe. We're always going to be worried about them being on their own or independent or out with their friends if we're not sure that they have the knowledge to keep themselves safe. So, knowing that something is a danger, being able to recognize it, and having a plan about what to do, which is why we talk to children about, for example, stranger danger. It's why we talk about, what you should or shouldn't do, being able to recognize that somebody asking you to get in their car. That's a danger signal. That's not something you should do. You should run and you should go find a safe adult, or you should make a loud noise, for example. We give them some knowledge and some skills in order to be able to manage that situation. So they need to know how to assess and reduce risks. So it's why we teach children how to cross the road so that they can look at the traffic and learn when is a safe time to cross, where is a safe place to cross, so they can reduce risks by, not never completely eliminating them. Anytime you're anywhere near a road, there is a risk, but keeping those to the minimum. And we teach them how to do those things. And it's experience that then builds up and helps to keep them safe. So it's not just adults who keep children safe. Children keep children safe. And one of the roles that we play is not actually in our supervision, it's in how we respond when children tell us things. So we know that, when children, for example, and I should give a little bit of a trigger warning here because I don't know what questions are going to come up in this session. And I am going to talk a little bit about things like, sexual abuse, for example. I've already mentioned stranger danger. And there might be things that come up in this session that you find really difficult to think about. It is being recorded. If you're watching live and you think, oh, okay, that's a bit hard, do step away. You can always come back and watch it, on catch up, or just take a moment or pause the recording, and just give yourself a moment if you're finding something hard, because it can be quite triggering thinking about difficult things happening to our children. And we often panic when we think about that. And one of the most important ways we can keep children safe is by being a calm and supportive person if things do go a little bit wrong. So one of the we know that when children are groomed, for example, whether online or in person, they're always told not to tell their parents, that they shouldn't tell their parents. And often the reason that they're given is their parents will be angry with them, or their parents will be upset with them. And if they have experiences, that child, that when they've told you things, you have been angry or you have been upset about that, that can kind of really play on their mind. And then they think, oh, I won't tell them. I've done something wrong. I mustn't tell them. Having a relationship in which children feel like I've done something wrong, it's okay to tell my mum or my dad. They're not going to go off the deep end, and they are going to help me and support me with that. So, part of what we do to be that safe and trusted adult is by being calm in those situations where children do get things wrong, or where they have done something which was a bit stupid, whether that's online or in person, and that we're calm about that and we don't make them feel like, oh gosh, I'm not going to tell them about that if it happens again, or I'm not going to come to them again. So these are difficult things to think about, but it's really about our children knowing how to keep themselves safe and us giving them independence gradually. One of the best ways that we can give them that kind of knowledge is by making sure they have some basic information. All children need to know their address and their phone numbers of their parents off by heart, or at least one of them. Now, yeah, when they're two, they're not going to be able to do that. But as soon as possible, my kids can still remember my phone number off by heart. It's the only one they can remember because, of course, they've got mobile phones. Everybody's in there, but they can still recite that because I drilled it into them and drilled it into them and drilled it into them to make sure that they knew what my phone number was. So that if they are, for any reason, without their phone, and many a time they've had to phone me on a different number and said, oh, my battery's gone, or I've lost my phone, or it's been stolen. This is where I am, but they knew my number. So making sure they know that kind of basic information, and also that they know the emergency number. So in the UK, 999, that's how you get help, and what to say. So if they were on their own and, something had happened, that they know to phone 999. Things like stranger rules: never go anywhere with a stranger, make as much noise as possible, run to safety, run to a safe adult. Schools will do that. Not, schools will also hopefully do some of the other drills, things like, fire drills. What do you do if there is a fire, etc. We can also do those in our home if you want to, thinking about actually doing a role play if there was. So if the fire alarm goes off, I bet you've got fire alarms, smoke alarms in your house. But how many of you have spoken to your kids about what do we do if it goes off? That's really important knowledge, because it might be that that fire is happening in a way that you can't get to them. So they need to know, if I hear that noise, this is what I do. So, certain drills of thinking through situations, also principles about who is a safe adult. In general, for example, if you see a mum with kids, she's probably a safe adult. If you're going to go into a shop, the shopkeeper, is likely to be a safe adult if you've just run into that shop to get away from harm. Where is a safe place? Thinking about that, and particularly in your local area, if you're giving them extra freedoms, maybe going to the park, talking about specific places which are safe or aren't safe. And a really big one is the difference between good and a bad secret. So there's many of you will know there's an NSPCC campaign called Pants, which is all about talking to very young children about body boundaries, and particularly about, sexual abuse, and, making sure that they know that, for example, the part of my body that's covered by my pants is private and nobody should, be asking to see that. Some really simple information. And if you're worried about talking about that topic with little ones, do go and have a look at that. But one of the key messages in there is also about good and bad secrets. So a good secret is something that makes you feel good. For example, if you've bought daddy a birthday present and it's a surprise, or you've made him a card that you're going to give him, then that's a good secret. A bad secret is a secret that makes you feel uncomfortable or sad inside in some way. It doesn't make you feel happy. You should always tell bad secrets. Should never keep a bad secret. You should always tell somebody. So very simple messages that really help children navigate knowledge. But we're really talking with them. We're not lecturing them and saying this. These are conversations. These come up from having conversations. And with teens, there's going to be extra knowledge, things like, where they should walk, particularly if it's dark, things like staying in groups and looking out for each other, once they are being independent, keeping valuables out of sight, but equally always giving up your valuables, without a fight to protect yourself, always knowing what you're eating, drinking, making sure you know where that's come from. And lots of the things we say to teens are about don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. But actually, as they get older, it's much more appropriate to start talking about, what happens when we're in certain states. So one of the things you need to think about with alcohol, or, smoking weed, drugs, for example, is if you do that, it affects your decision making. You're more likely to, not look when you cross the road. You're more likely to get into a car with somebody without thinking about it. You're more likely to have to take other risks. So it has to move away from don't do towards really talking about, the risks that are involved in some of those decisions. And I think that really important message for teens, that you will always help first. If they're in trouble, that they should reach out to you. The first thing you will do is help them. You'll talk about it later, but you will always help, no matter what stupid thing they've done or what stupid thing their friends have done. They should always reach out to you. And to give that as a very clear signal. There is no point, there's no moment at which you don't want to hear that they're in trouble, because you will not react with anger. And we, as I said, we need to do that in our actions, not just in our words. So we need to equip children with knowledge, and that helps us when it comes to introducing new freedoms. And what I want to give you here is a little bit of a blueprint, really, for how you go about introducing new freedoms, because at all ages in our children's lives we need to do that. The freedoms that they get when they're very young might still be quite strictly supervised, but as they're getting older, these are going to be out of our sight. So, you might be thinking about getting your child, allowing your child to go to the park, to the local park with their friends and without an accompanying adult. And a little bit of you might think, oh gosh, no, they're too young for that. But I'd urge you to think ahead a little bit. Lots of us get to that end of primary school, beginning of secondary school phase, when other freedoms almost automatically come into place. And suddenly we think, well, now they've got to walk to school. Now they've got to be home alone after school. Now they've got to be doing these things. But we've not really given them a run up to that. So it's a good idea to be thinking ahead and thinking, how can I start introducing small freedoms in a bite-sized way, in a managed way that helps them develop skills and knowledge and shows me what level they're at in terms of what responsibilities they can take. And as they do go into those sort of, secondary school and teenage years, they are going to fight you for those freedoms. So actually having a roadmap that says, okay, yep, I'm going to start giving you these freedoms, but we're going to do it in small doses. And then if I see that you can handle those and you're responsible with the freedom I do give you, then we'll look at giving you more. But rather than going from kind of 0 to 100 all in one go, some of this is about taking your specific child. We can't, and it would be so handy, wouldn't it, if I could just say, well, when they're 9, they should be able to do this. When they're 11, they should be able to do this. But children are all different. And, particularly if you've got a child who is neurodivergent, who might be more impulsive, perhaps, less good at thinking things through, you have to do things according to your child. The only way you can do that is a little bit of a trial and error process. So it's not just about age. So if you're thinking about letting a child kind of go to the park, I say by themselves, but probably with their friends rather than by themselves, but without an adult, rather than just allowing them to do that, actually be prepared to talk about what the risks might be, why you might be a bit worried about that. Talk through your concerns with them. Often parents think, well, if I do that, that's going to be scary. Well, obviously we need to do this in an age appropriate way. Um, you know, but we also, if we think this is a risk, we need to talk about it. And it might be your worry is that, they are, I mean, we had the thing about peer influence, that they're going to get carried away having fun with their friends and they're going to forget the rules and, leave the park, go somewhere else, or they're going to get a bit stupid on the play equipment and do something risky and somebody's going to get hurt. Or it could be that you're worried about other people, that there might be people in the park who see that they don't have an adult with them and try and pick on them or bully them, or that there's something unpleasant that might happen. Talk about what you think are the potential risks and use and ask what theirs are, because some children are very bold and very happy to go off and do stuff, and others are much more reluctant. They might have a lot of worries. So talk about those. What are you worried about? But talk about solutions. So this is all about not just surfacing, what the risks and concerns are, but coming up with mitigations and solutions. And what if is the best question to ask. So what if, your friend said, why don't we go to the fish and chip shop? Or what if some older kids came up to you and started doing this? What would you do? This is a really important stage, because actually your child might already have some really good strategies. They might already have thought about that, or indeed they might not have thought about it at all. So it helps you gauge their level of, readiness for independence, and it makes sure they do think about things and have a think about what would be a good response, and make a plan. If you are saying, right, you can go to the park by yourself, these are the rules and parameters. And I'll talk through the kind of typical rules and parameters that we might want to use. You might do a bit of a practice, a walk through together. So you might, for example, first time walk them to the park and just leave them there while you go and walk the dog around the edge of the park, and do a kind of a small slice of freedom. And then, if that all went well, then the next time, you might let them do the walk by themselves, or, with a friend, for example. But do a bit of a walkthrough, do a bit of a practice, do it in small doses, and then set a trial and say, okay, right, this is when you're going to do it. You can do it. You can go tomorrow. You can stay for this amount of the time. These are the rules. These are the parameters. If that all goes well, we'll chat about it afterwards. And afterwards, you do that review process. You work out, did they stick to the rules? Do you think, they responded well to that? Did anything go wrong? How did they problem solve it? And that review will help you decide, okay, they are or are not ready for this. So if they did do things that you think, oh goodness me, no, they shouldn't do that, then you can reduce that and say, that tells me you're not ready for this yet. We'll wait another month before we do that again. Or we'll do it in a slightly different way, a slightly, smaller doses. So we're aiming for a bit of a negotiated process that says, I'm going to give you this bit of freedom. We'll put some boundaries and risk reduction measures in place so I feel secure and so I know you're safe. And if you stick to those rules, I will know that you're ready for that freedom. And next time you will get more freedom. But if you don't stick to the rules, I'll know that you're not ready for it, and we will reduce the freedoms that you get. So we're linking kind of freedoms to evidence of responsibility so that we can really match it and make sure that we're not taking risks that are too big. So the kind of rules and parameters that you might want to think about are time. So how long are they allowed to go for? At what time do they need to be home, for example? Location sounds a bit, bonkers. If you're thinking, well, the park, what are the edges of the park? What are the boundaries? So, and I found that one out the hard way. Being really clear, you don't go through the gates of the park. That even though your friend lives just a couple of doors down or the shop is just opposite, that's not where I'm saying you can be. You can be in the park and you can't leave it. So being really specific, if they're older and they're going into town to go shopping, well, what are the boundaries of that? Where should they be staying? The people, who they're with, um, in terms of who they're going with and knowing who they're going with, but also thinking about safe people and not safe people, and behavior, what they should be doing while they're there, what is okay behavior, what isn't, and communication. So things like a checking in process. If they've got a phone, getting them to check in at a particular time, particularly as they get older. It's like, right, at 3 o'clock, you need to send me a text, tell me you're okay. And what will happen if they don't? So I always used to have the phone number of the kids that my kids were with. And I'd say, well, if you don't check in with me, at 3 o'clock, I will phone your friend. And that, of course, is deadly embarrassing. So they did often, that would be it. They'd check in and they'd let me know. And being really clear, I need to know where you're going to be. So I need to know where to start looking for you if you don't check in or if we do lose touch, making sure their phone, if they've got one, is fully charged. What would you do if? What would you do if you'd lost your phone? Or somebody had stolen your phone? What would you do if? Those kind of questions. And as I said, that kind of sense of there will be consequences for sticking to the rules and for breaking them. I want to see what you can do. We can use this process for pretty much anything, whether it's going to a party, whether it's staying home alone, thinking about what are the potential dangers and talking those through. Are they allowed to use the kettle if they're staying home alone, or is that a dangerous piece of equipment? What should they do if somebody comes to the door? That knowledge isn't frightening, it's keeping them safe. It's making sure that they are able to keep themselves safe. So, risk mitigation measures, making sure their phone is charged, that they've got a plan if their phone is lost, check in times, emergency funds. That is so much easier now if they have some kind of app that you can put money onto, very quickly. When I was younger, we always used to have a note kind of tucked away somewhere, um, just in case. An emergency code word sounds a bit strange, but ours was pineapple, if you're at all interested. Um, if your child is in a situation that they want help to get out of, but they don't feel able to tell you that they need help because they're being listened to. So it might be that peer influence, their friends, things are getting a little bit out of hand in some way or another. They'd really like a route out of this situation. And they use to you the code word. They might phone you up and, the classic, but ours, it was, oh, have we got pineapple juice? I really fancy some pineapple juice when I get home. And I'd be like, right, okay, you want to get out of this situation. And then we go on to a yes, no. So I will come to the park and I will pick you up and I will just say, look, you've got to come. We've got a problem at home. Or you can say that, now and just find a way, and then they can say, I've got to go. There's a problem at home. My mum said I've got to go, or whatever. But having an emergency code word and an emergency meeting point, if you're out and about and you're going somewhere like, I don't know, a museum, or you're in town and you're giving them a little bit of freedom, actually having that backup that says, if for any reason you can't get hold of me, maybe there's no phone signal or whatever, this is the place you go. This is the emergency place that we go to if we can't get hold of each other, and just designating where that is. And I did that with kids who were very young because I was a single parent when they were little. So I had to kind of think, if I lose you, if for any reason you lose me, this is what you need to do. This is who you need to talk to, or this is the meeting point. Um, so by thinking about those, we can help to manage some of our own worries as well. So that thought of, it came up in the things that you were worried about, something happening to our children and us not being there to help, we actually build our confidence that they do have the knowledge and the ability to rise to that. And that although none of us like to feel, like to think about our children being upset or hurt in any way, that's not a nice thought. But the idea that actually they'd have a pretty good idea of what to do in that situation if I wasn't around to help. I think that kind of helps to build our confidence a little. When it comes to the online world, it's a very similar process. And the online world really has similar risks to the real world, and children are vulnerable in similar ways. So I tend to think about the online world as, the equivalent of a bit of of a swimming pool. When we teach children to swim, we're really clear that to start off with, we're in the pool with them, we're holding them, they've got flotation devices, we're all within our, we can stand up. We absolutely eliminate as many risks as possible. And then slowly we need them to start swimming by themselves. And that involves us, being an arm's distance away while they've got their floats on. Then it involves us sitting on the side, perhaps while they're learning to swim with a swimming coach, or we end up just sitting and watching as they're getting better at it. And in the end, they get to an age where they go by themselves and they are in that pool with their friends. But we didn't do that all at once. We matched the way at which we retreated our supervision and our kind of management of what was going on according to how well they were able to swim, to manage what was going on around them. You can also think of social media as a school playground. That it's that there are people in there who are going to be nice and supportive. There are people in there who are going to be horrible. Some are going to be good friends, some are not. And all of the things that can happen in a school playground in terms of friendships being broken and made and exclusions, they can all happen via social media as well. The difference is you take it, you carry it around with you if you've got a phone, and that can be much more intense. So really with online safety, we want to start with strict parental controls, keep all devices in sight, and then move slowly towards greater independence. And just with real world safety, so much of this happens through conversations, by being curious, by asking what if, by knowing what they're doing, by talking openly and often about what they are doing online, so that we're, thinking about how they can stay safe on social networks. What would they do if they saw one of their friends being bullied? What constitutes online bullying? Both as a perpetrator and a victim, what is the right way to treat people online? So we slowly have these conversations. We slowly start off with overseeing and then withdraw. And it does mean kind of keeping up to date with whatever platforms they're using, and doing our research, signing up to the social networks that they're on or the apps that they're using, finding out, what the appropriate privacy settings are, making sure you know how to report or to block. And for that, you need expert advice because that's constantly changing. There are lots of organizations that help with this. The NSPCC, again, they've got some really good information on it. Internet Matters, really helpful. Get Safe Online, Safe on Social. Those are all kind of key places that you can go for really good advice on particular apps, particular platforms, to know what's going on there. So whenever you're allowing your child to kind of sign up to any of those things, making sure you've got the knowledge to be able to help them have the knowledge to be able to keep themselves safe. The kind of risks, that happen online that we worry about, and there are lots and lots of fears, particularly around tweens and teens and social media, especially, watching the Netflix adolescence drama, of things that can happen online. And I think what was really clear, for example, in that drama was there were no conversations happening about what the child was doing online. It was just leave them to it. That's it. Don't know what they're doing. I assume they're gaming. I assume they're doing this. And really, it's the conversations that are the most important part of this. You know, the big risk that parents worry about is grooming, It's actually quite rare, obviously, in real life and online, but impersonation is not that rare. So it's really easy to impersonate somebody else online. It could be impersonating one of your friends, it could be impersonating a child of the same age who's looking for friendship. But being clear with kids that you don't know who you're talking to if you're doing it online, that you have no way of knowing them. We have fears about inappropriate content. Again, having conversations about that, making sure that they know if they see something that worries them. So, particularly around pornography, which can be very violent, and often young children will stumble upon something. And once they're 11, it's not uncommon for them to go looking for that. Because they've heard about it from friends, etc. But really being prepared to have the hard conversations about the fact that the things they see online, that's not what real life relationships are like, that's not what real life bodies are like, that's not like what real sex is like. And being big and brave enough to talk about those things so that they feel like they can come to you with their worries and concerns, and that no topic is off limits. And the same with things like radicalization. I don't think shutting children down, if they say something, if your son kind of spouts something misogynistic, and you shutting that down and saying, you can't say that, that's not true. A much, much better way to approach that is by being curious to find out a little bit more. So that's a really, controversial opinion. What led you to thinking that, or where did you hear about that, or what makes you think that that's the case? And if you want to put an alternative viewpoint, well, some people would say, or many people would say, and engage with them in a conversation rather than shutting down those conversations, because radicalization really thrives on isolation and secrecy. So the more you can be prepared to talk about issues, the harder it is to kind of thrive in that kind of environment. They do need to know about sexting. Non-consensual sharing of images in particular, is one of the most common things that happens. Well, consensual sharing of imagery is incredibly common, but then that going further and being shared with other people, and just being really clear, don't do it. And if they get to a certain age, I think, again, as with the drugs conversation, these things have to change, and you have to say, well, I don't think that sending a photo of, a part of your body is a great idea. These are the risks, and I wouldn't do it. If you were to do it, what would be the safest way to do it? And if they say, well, you just have to trust the person, it's like, okay, but what if you fall out with them? Actually, the safest way to do it is to make sure there's nothing identifiable in that photo, that your face isn't in it, for example. So actually starting to have conversations at that upper end of the teenage years about um, how they could do these things safely, but without encouraging them. Obviously, bullying, not feeling liked, FOMO, that sense of being left out. You can see what all your friends are doing. And if you haven't been invited, that's kind of, difficult. And leaving a digital footprint, putting things online that perhaps are going to always be there. So kids need to know that, um, you know, the internet is not private. If you wouldn't wear it on a t-shirt, if you wouldn't tell your grandmother it, don't put it on the internet, or don't post it online in any way, or send it via a digital means. The biggest risk, of course, is actually lack of balance, excessive screen time. That has a way, way bigger risk when we look at children's well-being in the widest context of, their mental health, their physical health, their development. Actually, that lack of balance is far bigger a risk than any of the things that parents tend to worry about, which are the kind of more catastrophic things. And equally, there are benefits. Teens need to have more privacy online as they get older, and many of them find a lot of support, and they find a tribe, as it were, online. I want to finish just really briefly by thinking about us, because it is often our fears that get in the way. It's often, we are the ones who gatekeep what our children do. And often that is because the thought of something happening to our children is so horrible that we just want to avoid it at all costs. And, anxiety being a bit of a worrier, it's a temperamental thing. It's also a learned experience. It might be that you learned that through your own kind of parenting. But, some of us are worriers. The thing to remember is worrying and being afraid that something's going to go wrong won't make it go right. Actually, the things that will help it go right are all the things that I've talked about, actually putting measures in place, and that everything is a risk in a child's life. We can't get rid of all those risks, or they would never do anything at all. So when we focus too much on danger, it's really disabling both for us and for our children. So focusing on those skills for keeping themselves safe and trying to manage our own thoughts. We can fall into a lot of thinking traps as parents and end up catastrophizing or jumping to conclusions, predicting the future. Oh my goodness, they've done this bad thing, they did get it wrong at the park. This thing happened, and therefore the whole of their life they're just going to end up being this type of person. And we often jump on this train of worrying way into the future, bringing ourselves back to the present and thinking, right, this is who they are, this is how old they are, this is maybe the mistake that they've made, or this is the situation we're in. How can we build from here in a kind of concrete way? One of the biggest things that prevents us doing things, I think, even when we think, oh, I think that might be a good idea, is fear of being judged, you know, by other parents. That if other parents are not allowing their child to go to the park or stay home alone, or whatever, we worry that they're going to see us somehow as lax parents. And particularly with the children walking to school by themselves, that age has gone up and up and up as parents have kind of become more risk averse. And one of the reasons children have been getting mobile phones earlier and earlier in this country is a bit of fear. I want to know where they are. I want them to be able to get in touch with me. I want to be able to track where they are. So try to make your decision based on what you think is right and based on your child. And remember, we aren't in control of all of this. And sometimes things will happen in our children's lives that are difficult and that are challenging. We can't judge our success as parents on our children's success. Great parenting is not about producing great children who do great things and where everything goes right. Great parenting is about having a really good relationship with the actual child you have so that you can walk alongside them through their development and help them in becoming an independent young adult, who can be successful in their terms. So trying not to feel like if something happens to our child, that is a reflection on us. As long as we've done everything we can to kind of mitigate risks and we feel like this is age appropriate, we need to accept that we can't control everything. And that's part of the hardest thing about parenting, is that sense that, something could happen. And we have to learn to find a way to live with that. And the older they get, the more, independent they become, and the more we need to manage those thoughts. So I'm going to leave you with some takeaways about, making sure you do promote independence and play and hand over freedom, equip children with skills and knowledge, and talk openly with your children, not lecturing them on things, but really discussing, tackling your own thinking patterns, and remembering competent, confident adults with children who got to try things out. Right. Laura, I'm wondering if we have any questions yet. I'm just going to take the slides down. Oh, and I'm just going to put my camera back on. There
Brilliant.
I
It
am.
was great. Thank you so much, Anita, for such an interesting webinar. Lots to take away. I'm sure my children will be delighted with my chat with them. So we have had a couple of questions come in, but we've got time for a few more. So if anybody wants to put in a question, if you want to drop it into the Q&A box, we can pick that up afterwards. So our first question that's come through is, my children are of different ages, and the younger one is pushing quite hard to have the freedoms that their older sibling already has. Have you got any tips on how I can explain why they cannot have this now? Because they just see this as fundamentally unfair.
Yeah. Well, kids, that fair thing, kids use the phrase "it's not fair" basically to mean I don't like it. I'm not getting what I want. And I think as a parent, setting out to make everything fair is probably just a cul-de-sac that you're going to get stuck in. Actually, it's not about fair being, both kids should get exactly the same treatment. Fair is about each child having their needs met and that we parent them in a way that is appropriate for them. And at different ages, different children, that's going to be different. So putting on your parental armor and of saying, well, I'm sorry you think it's not fair, but this person is this age, they're able to do that. As you get older, and as I see that you are responsible, then of course you'll be able to do these things, but that's not going to happen now. And start on that roadmap and says, this is how we're going to do it. You can't go and do that. But I tell you what, we're going to do this little thing, and I'm going to see how you cope with that. And that will be the first step on that journey. But you do have to kind of put on a little bit of armor when it comes to the it's not fair argument and just go, yep, I'm sorry you think it's not fair, but that's my decision. It's difficult when sometimes younger children actually are able to take on responsibilities and freedoms a little bit earlier than their elder siblings do. And that might be because you were a bit slow with the first one. You were like, oh, I didn't do it very early. It could be that they're a different personality. It could be the other way around. Your younger one might be much more much more risk taker, for example, and actually less able to have those. You've got to take those things into account and try not to get led astray by kids basically saying, I want to do it, and I'm going to guilt trip you into letting me do it.
Yes, that's great. And it sort of leads me to thinking the other way round, that if you were a little slow with your first child, for example, because you were cautious, and you're thinking, actually, my younger child can have their phone when they're a little bit younger, or they can start walking to school when they're a little bit, younger. How would you suggest you could sort of reason that to the older child, who again might be thinking, well, that's, I had to wait till I was 14, or I had to wait.
Yeah. I think, older children are almost always going to do that too. They're always going to turn around and say, "Oh, but you let him do things that I wasn't allowed to do at that age," or "You're much softer on him." And again, we just have to turn around and say, "You know what? I'm just doing my best here. I was doing my best with you. I'm doing my best with them. I do get things wrong. Maybe I could have let you do that a little bit earlier, but one of the things about being the oldest is I get to practice on you. And sometimes that's a really good thing. And sometimes you maybe get the bad end of that and try to kind of keep that very light and not encourage comparisons and that strive for everything to be the same. Try to individualize your approach and make them feel really clearly that, it's them that they're parenting, not both of you or all three of you. It's kind of each one of you I'm doing this with, and I'm just trying to do my best.
Brilliant. That's great. So the next question we've had come in is, should I be checking the apps and conversations my daughter is having online? Other parents say they do this, and I haven't up to now, as it feels like an invasion of her privacy. But am I being a bit reckless in not?
So it does depend on their age, I think. That's kind of the most important thing there, because I'd say the younger they are, the answer is yes. So if your child is under 13, I would say you need to have access to their phone. Certainly when they first get it, they need to know that you're checking it and that you will have a look. And certainly that you have the ability to do that so that, this isn't a space that is completely, screened off from you. But as they get older, it is completely age appropriate for them to have some online privacy. And it's not the checking, the supervision that's going to keep them safe. It's the conversations, it's the talking about what they're doing. That's what's going to keep them safe. So it's a gradual handover process of starting, at the beginning with some, with checking and then slowly leaving them to it. And if you leave that too long, if you keep trying to check when they, are at an age where it's like, no, I want my privacy. Maybe they're exploring their identity. Maybe there's things going on that they just don't really want to talk to you about. The danger is they'll find ways around that and they'll just do that in secret in another way. And that kind of develops a relationship in which they are deliberately not telling you things. Whereas, that kind of sense of, I'm going to trust you to do that, but it'd be really, but I still do still want us to keep talking about it. Um, so yeah, it depends on age and your particular child. I think the actual answer.
Brilliant. Great. Well, they're all the questions we've had come in so far. I've got a few sort of end comments. So if anybody has anything they have been trying to type up, you've still got a moment to put them through. But in the meantime, thank you so much for answering those questions, Anita. And to remind everybody that they will be sent a recording of this webinar along with Anita's slides and some more resources within a week or so of the end of the webinar. Support Network has a whole range of webinars to assist members throughout their lives, and you can find further information on upcoming webinars as well as recordings of our previous ones on our website. If you're interested in any of them, you can book on to watch live, or if you book on, you can receive the recording to watch at your leisure. Our upcoming parenting webinars include Preparing Teenagers for Leaving Home, Children and Anxiety, How Parents Can Help, and Supporting Teenagers' Self-Esteem. The booking links for these are up on our website, and you will also see there some finance and wellbeing webinars in case any of those are of interest too. So we've not had any other questions come in, so it just leaves me to finally say thank you once again, Anita, for such an interesting webinar and for answering the questions, and our delegates for joining us today. Goodbye.
Take care, everyone.